A lot of the videos on this channel are about the workshop itself, the skills and techniques and tool tips that you can apply to whatever projects you make. This has never been a watch me build this project type of channel, but we do build things in this workshop and sometimes we even film them. So today I'll show you how we made a solid wood front door. This isn't a difficult project, but it includes a lot of tips and techniques that you'll find useful for other types of furniture making. So it's not just about this project. You're going to learn things that you can apply to lots of other projects. And frankly, building your own front door is sort of a bucket list item that a lot of woodworkers have. So here's what we'll be making. It's 80 inches tall and 30 inches wide. That's considered a little narrow for modern residential door openings, but since we're making it ourselves, we can fit it to our particular needs. Choose your lumber carefully. This isn't the type of project you go to Home Depot and buy wood for. Find a hardwood dealer or a mill or look on Craigslist for some wood that has some character. After all, this will be one of the most visible parts of your home for decades to come. Here we're laying out the parts on the boards, working around any knots or imperfections and picking the grain we want. Everything is then rough cut to break down the large boards into more manageable chunks that may be milled flat and straight. At this point, all the wood is kept as thick as possible. The goal is to just get it flat and to clean up the surfaces. A residential exterior door is usually 1.75 inches thick, so we're going to have to laminate pieces together to achieve the thickness we need. This starts at the bandsaw, where each of the major components are turned into 2 1/4-inch thick slices. Resawing, I think, is one of the most satisfying jobs in the whole shop. If you have a good, well-tuned bandsaw and a sharp blade, you can get ready to use slices right off the saw. Otherwise, you just have to cut them a little bit thicker, maybe 3/8, so you can then plane the blade marks from the surfaces and still end up with about a 1/4-inch thickness that you'll need for the next step. Hopefully, you didn't throw away any of your wood scraps, because you can use all those knots and other imperfections as core material. It's all sawn up into strips that are 1 3/8 thick. Now you notice a lot of my strips are fairly wide because I did have some thick lumber. The width does not matter, just the thickness, so you could do this with just 3/4-inch material. These strips will then be placed between 2 skins to make a solid but stable sandwich. It's also a good idea to alternate the direction of the rings so they don't all run together. That might help minimize cupping over time. Glue up is a messy process, but a roller will make it faster. I recommend a water-resistant glue like Titebond 3. That particular brand is also nice because you get a little more working time before the glue starts to tack up, and that's something helpful when you have so many pieces to glue up. You'll notice that we even slipped some short pieces in there. End-to-end seams don't matter as long as there's no voids. At this point, we're only edge gluing the strips together. The skins are going to go on later. Parallel clamps are really handy for this, but pipe clamps would work too. You just need clamps that will lay on the bench in a position that you can easily place your glue-covered strips on. I hope you bought a lot of glue, because you're going to need a ton of it for this project. You'll also need a ton of patience and clamps. Here we're forced to use clamps that are way too big for the glue up because it's all we had left. 2 sections are placed together with no glue between them, of course, so they can share these big clamps. As each section dries, the glue squeeze out is scraped off. Don't worry that the surface isn't perfectly even. That's why we made the strips a little extra thick. Once the sections are dry, it's back to the planer to even them out and bring them down to the final 1.25 inch core thickness that we're going to need. Once the 2 1/4-inch skins goes on, that will add up to 1.75 inches. Here the major components are laid out as they will be in the finished door. Nothing is cut to length yet, but you can see how the door will look for the first time. The skins are all laid in place to determine the grain direction that looks best. As I said, the whole point is to make a door with some character. If you just want perfectly clear boards and straight grain, you may as well buy a door. The smaller sections are skinned with a roller and more glue. Then they're placed in a vacuum bag. This is a rocket vacuum system, which is relatively inexpensive because it utilizes a hand pump instead of an expensive vacuum pump. It works really well, and I think it's a great way to get into vacuum pressing for the first time. The longer pieces are too big for my bag, so they have to be clamped in the conventional way. Notice how a pin nail or two is shot into the end of each skin. This just helps keep it from slipping around as clamping pressure is applied. Those ends will be trimmed off, and that tiny brad won't harm a saw blade even if it were to hit it. The two long assemblies are clamped together between some 3/4 inch melamine platens. These will help distribute the clamping pressure evenly across these relatively thin 1/4 inch skins, and glue won't stick to the slick surfaces. Still, we use as many clamps as possible just to be sure. There's something about a long line of matching clamps that just looks right to the obsessive-compulsive woodworker. Once everything is dry, it's not a bad idea to run them through your planer on a really light pass, or if you have one, a drum sander, just to even everything out and ensure that all your major components are of the exact same thickness. Then, they're ripped to their final width at the table saw and trimmed to their final length. Before we start on the window, check this out. It's just a couple of cuts. Your ears will be fine, right? They will be if you have your ISOtunes Bluetooth earbuds in, because you'd already have your ANSI certified hearing protection on because you're listening to your favorite music and podcasts, and you're supporting a small family business at the same time. Please use the link below this video to learn more and to show them you support what we do as well. This seems like a good time to start the window grids. We'll be using some old bevel glass that Pete picked up at an antique shop. Fortunately, they're sized to fit perfectly within our door's design. So the grid is 1/2 inch material connected with slip joints that are cut at the table saw. This is a relatively straightforward joint that's easy to make and very strong once it's assembled and glued up. The major components are once again laid out and marked for mortising. We have a separate tutorial all about this process, which I'll link to below this video so we don't have to go into great detail here. We're using loose tenon joinery. This is done with a simple homemade jig and a router. No $1,000 domino machine is required. Again, watch that tutorial to see more. It's a great skill to have for all sorts of projects. This is a really exciting part of the project. There's something about the finality of the glue up, turning all those separate components into a solid assembly. The openings between the rails and stiles will be filled with solid panels and held in place with custom moldings. These are made partly at the table saw and partly at the router table. It's a multi-step process that depends on the particular profile you choose to make, but the basic shape is self-explanatory. You'll see how they work once they're installed. They're assembled into frames much like a picture frame, except the position of the rabbets are reversed. Similar moldings go into the window opening to hold the grid. These must have slots cut in the back so they'll slip in place. One molding frame is inserted on each side of each opening. You can see the frames have already been installed on the underside of the door at this point. The panels are 1/2 inch thick solid wood. They're cut a little undersized and they're not glued in place. Rather, a bead of silicone holds them to prevent rattling while still allowing them to expand and contract. Note the spacers used to ensure a 1/8 inch gap all the way around the panel. These spacers, of course, are removed before the other molding frame is put in place. You'll also note that the panel has already been pre-finished. This is to prevent the appearance of any unstained light wood around the panel if it should shrink in its opening over time. Here, the molding frames are placed on the inside of the door. While they were glued on the outside of the door, these are only nailed in place, so a panel may be repaired someday if needed. A very similar process is used for the window opening. Here, the frame is glued and nailed to the outside of the door. The door is then turned around and the grid is inserted into the notches in that frame. The small moldings are what actually hold in the glass, and they must be attached to the grid one piece at a time. The grid will then be removed for finishing. This door was finished with an oil-based stain, then coated with a high-quality spar urethane to protect it from water and UV rays. This is the particular finish that we used. Notice how the window grid was finished separately. That's because it can't be fully installed until the glass goes in. After the finish is dry, the grid can be slipped back into the slots in the molding frame. There's no need to glue it in place. The other molding frame will secure it. Here you can better see the smaller stick moldings that were previously nailed in place to hold the glass panes. Adhesive-backed weather stripping is applied to them. These strips are sticky on both sides, so the glass panes will stick to them and won't rattle around inside the frame. Finally, the inner molding frame is put in place. Since this is on the inside of the door, no weather stripping is needed here. And as before, it's nailed without glue so repairs can be made someday. The windows are completed with the installation of the final molding sticks on the inside of each pane. The door looks a little orange at the moment, but that fresh finish will tone down a bit in the weeks after installation. I wish I had some better photos of the door on the house, but it wasn't my house and I didn't install it, so this is all I have. It was a fun project that really wasn't that difficult. I plan to make one for my own house someday because it just seems right for a woodworker to make the door that he walks through every day. See you next time.